And welcome to another episode of The Focal Thought. My guest today is Dr. Don St. John. How are you?
Good. Thank you. I'm looking forward to this conversation with you.
Thanks very much, Don. I'm excited to speak with you as well. In just a little bit of an introduction for our guests. So you've studied Gestalt therapy at the LA Gestalt Therapy Institute, as well as Neo-Reichian therapy. And you've also done some coherence therapy with Dr. Bruce Ecker and AEDP therapy as well, and some CIMS therapy, and that acronym is CIMS. And you've taken immersion courses and core training with Dr. Sue Johnson's emotionally focused couples therapy. And you're also a trainer emeritus in Hellerwork Structural Integration. And you are certified in somatic training, the trauma work of Dr. Peter Levine. And you've been practicing and teaching Continuum, which is developed by Emilie Conrad. And you're also the author of a book, Healing the Wounds of Childhood, a psychologist's journey and discoveries from wretched beginnings to a thriving life. So that's great. And I'm really glad to have you on the episode today.
Yeah, thank you. That about covers my professional history.
Sure. And each of those is an episode unto itself. And I wanted to ask you something just right off the bat. On your website, there's a beautiful picture of a tree. And I encourage our listeners, to go and visit the website and look at this. And, I'll put the information, contact information in the show notes after. But was that something that you just sort of, randomly picked, or was there some purpose to it? Because it's very beautiful. It also has, some elements of fractal geometry to it.
Well, I think we selected it. It's been a few years now, so you're challenging my memory here a little bit. But I believe we selected it to represent natural growth. A young tree has years and years of growth. And my perspective is that a human being can grow spiritually, psychologically, and somatically and relationally as long as they're still breathing on this earth. My wife and I are both in our 79th year, and I'm speaking out of personal experience that we feel that we're continuing to learn, and that there's no end point to learning. And I believe that's why we selected that image that you're referring to.
No, that's great. And, from that picture of the tree, the overall beauty is very healing, for the eye to see. It's very picturesque. And I suppose that's the summation of, a natural growth, because once you grow and blossom into, your purpose and, the ideal version of yourself, that's beauty in itself, right?
That is beautiful, for sure. That's the natural beauty of the human spirit radiating forth into the world, and into our relationships, whether they're, our marital relationships, our friendships, our associates. The more we grow, the more we radiate energy, and that's beauty.
No, that's terrific. And I wanted to ask you, so leading into my next question, what does it mean to be a whole human being? Because I know you've done a lot of work with this. This is also sort of central, to the work that you do. If you could just talk a little bit about that, please.
I can, and I will. But first, to say that I can't answer it definitively because I'm still in process.
Fair enough.
So, for me to become a whole human being, it's interesting because I gave a presentation a couple of weeks ago at a body-mind conference, and as I was preparing for it, I had an insight, just a different way of looking at the answer, Croydon, to your question. What does it mean to become a whole human being. And the insight that I received was it has to do with our feeling sense of our entire body and its relationships and functions. Now, I know that's a mouthful, and in order to understand what I mean by that, it's important to reflect upon the following. When we talk about the body, we're using language of the third person, okay? A thing, the body. And we can talk about, the joints, the nervous system, the brain, etc., etc. But as a philosopher named Thomas Lewis Hanna pointed out, the body also has a subjective side, the experiencing I. So as I'm walking, I'm experiencing my body in motion. And I began to wonder if wholeness is about reclaiming the fullness, the richness, the connections, relationships, functions of the feeling side of the body. So, for example, if an individual has little connection to their legs, that their legs barely exist in the field of their consciousness, that person is likely to feel insecure, to not feel well grounded. Okay, so this sense of groundedness, of being connected to the earth, of being secure on the earth is a function that is part of the feeling sense of that part of our body. And we can go on and on with these analogies, with these relationships, functions, capacities that are all related to our feeling sense of our body.
That's very interesting. I suppose I've thought of it, philosophically when we talk about the self and things like that. But you're actually saying that we think of the body as separate from us, but then we are also, inside the body. So there's this almost dualistic relationship that's happening.
Well, yeah, if you want to look at it from a spiritual vantage point where, many spiritual traditions assert that the spirit is housed in the body, that the body is the temple, if you will, of the spirit. And, it's also the spirit that's experiencing the sense of self in that body. So I'm saying that, let me turn it another way, Croydon. The impacts and insults of life tend to move the spirit out of particular areas of the body. Let me give you a stark example. If a person grows up in a household where sexuality doesn't exist, it's not mentioned, it's clear to anyone living there that it's a taboo subject. You get the picture. Well, a child will respond to that environment by exiting the sexual area of his or her body, exiting the pelvis, particularly the lower pelvis, and in that way conform to the atmosphere and injunctions of the household. Okay, so in the process of becoming whole, that spirit needs to re-enter and re-experience, feel that part of themselves, that, you know, we are sexual beings, among many other things. We are here to be on this earth through our legs and feet.
Wow. So just like earlier when you were saying, you know, in the case of example with the feet, if we're not bringing thought and awareness to a certain area of the body, we will naturally exit from there and then it'll stagnate.
Yes. And or if there's trauma that relates to that part of the body. So trauma and or the lack of use, we might say, practice, linkage.
No, I agree with you on that, because I am someone myself who's very involved with the mind, you know, with a lot of the reading I do, with the curiosity I have, you know, with a lot of the things I check out on the internet, etc. It's always, you know, using the brain, and it should be, you know, more of the body as well. I might only think of the body, you know, while during exercising. Many times I'm not cognizant of, you know, the posture I'm at. And it's only until very recent, you know, maybe the last few years, maybe, that I've become to forcibly be aware of what my body posture is, how I'm feeling, certain, you know, kinesthetic aspects, you know, trying to get the sense into, you know, areas like you're saying, like the legs, where we really don't think about it. We take for granted, right?
It's a cultural phenomenon. It's not, you know, you're not alone. I mean, for the most part, the assumption is that the body is simply to carry the mind around, rather than the mind is throughout the whole body. Because we have, you know, different experiences, different thoughts, even as we inhabit ourselves more and more.
So it might be good when people are doing meditation, rather than say, you know, always trying to focus on the mind, do meditation to focus on the different parts of the body, right? That'll be one way of sort of step one to bring life back into the body.
That's definitely a step in the right direction. You know, there are conferences now about somatic experiencing, about somatic engagement. And, you know, checking out these conferences, there's a growing awareness of what I'm talking about. It's definitely cutting edge. You know, the old mind-body paradigm is still very much the law of the land, but there's a slowly emerging comprehension that, you know, it's completely different than what we had previously thought. It's not just this thing that we have to, you know, exercise and feed well to keep it going, but it's our very aliveness.
I like that you said that, because, you know, when you speak of the body, people will immediately turn to, you know, going to the gym and exercising and saying, hey, I'm using my body. But
Exactly.
being alive with the body is radically different. That could be, you know, maybe dancing or, you know, doing yoga, things like that.
Exactly. All of those things. And you know, valuing not only cardiovascular endurance and strength, but valuing responsiveness, resilience, receptivity, pleasure. it could be pleasurable simply to walk.
So, in keeping in line with pleasure, I've heard you say before that, and I wanted to get your thoughts on this. People sometimes, or maybe generally, are not comfortable, being in their own body. They're not comfortable with the natural feeling. Do you think that is because we take our body for granted, when it's in good health, that we don't feel anything? And that's why they sometimes turn to, things like drugs and alcohol, because that gives them that feel-good body. What are your thoughts on that? Why are we not comfortable in our natural body?
I agree that that's one of the reasons that people will turn to drugs and alcohol. But I think that, the fundamental problem lies in our comprehension. Okay? I remember back in the early 50s that, if a person played 9 holes of golf on Sunday morning, they would consider themselves an active person. And there was no understanding of the relationship between lifestyle and health. It simply didn't exist. If you got sick, it was bad luck, or you caught, a virus, a germ. Gradually, the culture began to realize that lifestyle is related, and that exercise and nutrition are the 2 primary factors. Okay, and what I'm suggesting, Crichton, is that comprehension is evolving, so that we're beginning to realize that this feeling sense of our body is important to our well-being, that it relates profoundly to our sense of ourselves, and it relates to our sense of wholeness, our sense of well-being, our sense. And the other thing I almost forgot to mention is that our capacity to connect with another person intimately, deeply, is very much related to our capacity to connect with ourselves. And I'm saying that that's what I'm calling our feeling sense of our body. The connection that we have to it, and that we can sense, that we can feel. And it relates very much to our ability to be with another person. It's very interesting. I know that, for many people, this can even sound strange. It's that new. I'm rewriting the book that you described to make it more general, because I've come to believe that we've all been wounded in 3 general areas. The first being our connections, our connections with our body, our connections with nature, our connections with each other, our connections with the cosmos. I believe we're also wounded in our sense of identity. The who I am, by and large, has a great deal of room to grow and to expand. And the third area that I think we've all been wounded in by cultural ignorance is our, what did I say? I said our sense of responsibility, our sense of our power to author our lives. And I say that, Croydon, as a person who was extremely traumatized for the first 15 years, beginning with birth itself, and for the next 15 years of my life, extremely traumatized, and spent, the next 70 years of my life attempting to become whole in this process that I am now talking about. That was
Yes.
a long answer. Sorry.
No, that's great. A lot of good fundamentals there. And it's coming from the title of your book. I really like the adjectives that you use when you say wretched beginnings to a thriving life, because that's the polar opposite, and that's the goal to strive for in some sort of extremity. Do you think on a fundamental nature, because the body's all about feeling, and in natural health, I think the feeling is very alkaline. And then when you introduce things like, alcohol, drugs, fried foods, etc., I always tend to associate those with acidic feelings. And do you think people are more drawn towards acidic feelings than alkaline feelings, which is why, they chase those things? And definitely, the alkaline things in life are more healthier for you, they're better for you, whereas the acidic things aren't. But depending on how you find meaning in the feeling, the acidic feeling might be better for you, right? In an ironic sort of way.
It's not an area that I've delved into in terms of acidic and alkaline. But if it's comparable to, let's say, tranquil, placid feelings on one hand and the more excitable on the other, can we draw that parallel there?
Exactly, yeah. And again, I'm just using acidic and alkaline to describe, like you're saying, placid versus, Las Vegas. Put it that way.
Well, I think for me, the ideal is a fluidity that allows for each side to emerge in response to the necessity. So, for example, if you're at your college football game's homecoming and you're sitting in the stadium, it's much more fun to get really excited and yell and cheer and root for your team. But most other times it's much more appropriate to be tranquil and serene and calm, and so fluidity would be my answer as to what would be more ideal. But at the biochemical level, I'm not qualified to talk about.
Sure. And once again, I'm not using those words from a biochemical level. It's just to describe those feelings. And I like your approach, just in terms of fluidity, which encompasses different peaks and valleys of being tranquil and being excited, right? Because living in extremes will have its own sort of devastation, to some extent.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned emotional nutrients, so emotional nutrition, and this is where we feed ourselves food-wise, nutritionally, but then emotionally, you said it's very good to have someone who's there for you in terms of time, in terms of presence, in terms of eye contact, when you look into their eyes and that they're showing love towards you, or caring towards you, and just giving their presence, physically, spiritually, mentally towards you. And that is very empowering. And I've heard you say that in instances where people don't have those connections, where they don't have loved ones to do that, you as a doctor will give that to a patient. Do you think we can ever maybe get to a point where we can do that for ourselves? Because I know this sort of might start with attachment, when we're very young, being dependent on our parents and things like that. What are your thoughts on that? Can we ever do this on our own, or do we always have to depend on other people?
That's a very good question, Croydon. I think there are two answers there. We do need to get to a place where we can regulate ourselves, where we can take care of ourselves, where we can feel the nourishment in simply being with nature, being out in the woods or on the mountains or by the water, being with people in general. At the same time, I think it's important for most human beings to have a deep connection with someone. Think about it. The worst form of punishment is solitary confinement.
Yes.
If you're in prison and you misbehave, you're punished by being placed in solitary confinement. And it's no joke, because and at the deeper spiritual level, because we are connected, the reality is that we are connected, whether it's through consciousness, whether it's through the air we breathe or the water in the air, however it may be, there is a link. And I think recognizing and honoring that linkage is important. I think when we don't have those kinds of real love connections, that we have to insulate ourselves at a deep level to not feel the pain, the loneliness of that. So I think it behooves human beings to, aspire to those kinds of relationships. It doesn't have to be marriage, but it has to be love connection. There's a lovely book about that called Love 2.0. I'd recommend to learn more about what I mean by these love connections. These moments where we feel the other person with us and they feel us with them. Very special.
Yes, I mean, you can always pat yourself on the back, but there's nothing like someone else patting you on the back, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I wanted to just finally ask you, so, you speak about, 4 general steps in terms of, relieving some of the imprints of trauma when it happens, whether on a physical level or a mental level. You talk about somatic education, which is, again, enriching living in the body, bringing the body alive. You talk about psychological growth, expanding the sense of self, discovering limiting beliefs, positive feelings, cultivating those. You talk about relationship enrichment, and here we're getting into that love connection, deepening the capacity for emotional and sexual intimacy. And you also talk about spirituality, where you're talking about the heart's intelligence. And I think it's important for people to know that when trauma happens, there's no sort of one size that fits all with helping to cure the trauma or to do therapy on the trauma, right? Different people might have different ways they resonate with the different healings, right? So you might choose one or the other, or there's no generalized approach, right?
Correct. Not only that, we use the word trauma in many different ways. If you were to survey the literature, you would find at least 5 different types of trauma named. For example, shock trauma, big T trauma versus little t trauma, developmental trauma, relational trauma. Trauma is a widely used word, so I think it's more useful to attempt to assess where the impacts are. Okay. How have I been impacted by that event? Am I not able to take a deep breath? Am I having recurrent nightmares? Am I, avoiding relationships? So I think it's, to look at what's been impacted, how have I been affected, and then proceed from there.
Correct, yeah. And, bringing it back to the whole, I suppose if we were, whole throughout our life, it might not be as an exciting life as it could be. I mean, some of the fun is, not to say that trauma is fun, but, figuring these problems out, solving them, that sort of, makes life interesting, right? To some extent.
Yeah, in fact, I'm rewriting my book, and I'm going to change the title to Healing the Wounds of Childhood and Culture, subtitle, An Adventure of a Lifetime.
Nice.
So look for it at the end of the year.
No, I'm looking forward to that. And I'm glad you're rewriting it, because too often when we write books, we reflect after on what else we could have written, and new experiences happened and we want to add to the book. So I'm really glad you're doing a follow-up edition to your first book. And Dr. St. John, Don, thank you very much for coming on the episode. It was really great having you. If there's a way for people to contact you, what would you prefer? Is there sort of like the website you want them to come back, or any other contact information?
Yeah, let me give you my email address, and I welcome inquiries or comments. It's Don, D-O-N, at st-jon.com.
Okay, perfect. And I'll put those in the show notes, as I said.
There's no H in the John in the email, so Don at st-jon.com.
Perfect. Awesome. And thanks again for the episode today. And I wish you all the best.
It was my pleasure. Thank you, Croydon.